I knew she wouldn't like it. That was never the question. But I didn't expect her to detonate the moment the words left my mouth. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I always hated the silence of Tuesday dinners, the day the house felt too big, too clean, too far from anything real. She had hired a private chef to experiment with macrobiotic alignment, which translated to a lot of green things that tasted like soap. I paid for it, of course, along with the rest of her evolving definition of self-care. Breathwork retreats in the desert. A monthly subscription to something called holistic feminine mapping. Private drivers. Guided journaling coaches. Each charge came with a self-congratulatory email. That night, I pulled up our joint expenses on my tablet while she scrolled through her phone across the Marble Island. My voice stayed calm, controlled. I never raise it. We need to cut back. She didn't look up at first. Just kept flicking her finger along the screen, like I hadn't spoken. Then her fork hit the salad bowl with a sharp clang, and she finally turned to face me. Maybe you're the excess. No hesitation. No smirk. Just pure, surgical dismissal. I blinked once. Her eyes didn't flinch. She stood, left her half-eaten plate behind, and walked out of the room like I was already gone. The silence that followed wasn't angry. It was administrative, like a decision had already been made, and I'd simply been notified late. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the den, scrolling back through every bank statement, every new charge, every vendor name I didn't recognize. The list was longer than I expected. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt something quieter, heavier, the beginning of a rupture I couldn't yet name. The next day, I came home early from a meeting to grab a file I'd forgotten, only to find the front door wouldn't open. I tried the code. Then my key. Nothing. I knocked once. No answer. When I looked through the side window, I saw the locks had been changed. The new keypad flashed red. I stood there a full minute before checking my phone. A single text from her. Giving us space to breathe. You said we needed it. I hadn't said that. I reread the message twice. The phrasing was clinical. Rehearsed. She hadn't just locked the door. She'd locked me out of the narrative. The part that hit hardest wasn't the locks. It was her mother's car in the driveway. I parked 2 houses down and walked back on foot, not wanting to believe it until I saw it myself. But there it was, that silver crossover with the dented fender, parked in my spot like it belonged. I stepped onto the porch and rang the bell, more out of ritual than hope. A few seconds passed, and then the door cracked open. Her mother's face appeared, lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She's not here, she said, not bothering to open the door all the way. She thought it best I be here, just in case. I looked past her and saw cardboard boxes stacked neatly near the staircase. My jackets. A few files from the home office. My favorite chair blanket folded like a gift. This is what space looks like, I asked, keeping my voice low. I wasn't going to give her anything to report back. She gave a tight shrug. She said you'd understand? Understand what, exactly? That I'd been extracted from my own home without a word of discussion? That she'd staged this like a wellness retreat, only this time, the toxicity she needed to cleanse was me? I turned and left without another word. There was no use arguing with someone who'd already written the ending. That night, I checked into a short-term rental across town, clean, corporate, anonymous. 4 rooms of beige furniture and silent HVAC hum. It was the kind of place people stayed when they were trying not to exist. But I wasn't disappearing. I was watching. Every move she made from that point on I logged. Every shared account, every document we once had access to together. I took screenshots, saved PDFs, noted changes and access permissions. She didn't just want space. She was laying groundwork. Moving pieces. I kept my tone neutral in the few texts I did send. No accusations. No desperate calls. Just brief, logistical messages. She didn't respond to most. When she did, it was with pre-cleared phrases. Processing time. Personal clarity. Shifting dynamics. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she acknowledge that her version of space involved calculated erasure. I booked a meeting with my accountant the next morning, and I started keeping a private log titled May Revision, because I wasn't just watching anymore. I was documenting the dismantling. By the end of that week, the narrative began to circulate, but not from me. It started subtle. A mutual friend, one of those conscious entrepreneurs she'd met at a retreat, reached out under the guise of concern. Casual check-in, light tone, but the subtext was sharp. "She mentioned you were pretty rigid about finances," the message read. "I just hope you're both getting the clarity you need." Rigid body. That was the word now. I didn't respond. But I archived the message and added the name to my list. It wasn't long before others followed, people we'd known as a couple, now carefully deciding who to align with. I could see her hand in it, the tone, the language, the curated innocence. When I finally pulled our shared business statements, it all began to fit. Dozens of recent charges, all categorized under vague professional terms. Coaching sessions, consulting retainers, alignment strategy. But the vendors weren't companies I recognized. The payments were round numbers, frequent, and most interesting of all, routed through a single digital wallet tied to one name. Marcus Hale. I hadn't seen that name in years. He used to be a junior strategist at a firm I mentored back when we were scaling fast. Eager, charismatic, always orbiting the edge of self-promotion. Now he was rebranded, part of her growth circle, she'd said. I remembered her mentioning a strategy retreat 2 months back. She came home glowing. Not from the sun. At the time, I wanted to believe it was genuine. Maybe she needed clarity. Maybe she was carving something of her own. But now, with every duplicate invoice, every repackaged business expense, routed through this one man, the story cracked wider. I printed every transaction, sorted them chronologically, color-coded the ones tied to Hale's alias. Meanwhile, she was busy refining her new character. To our friends, she spoke of rediscovery. Claimed I'd tightened the leash after she started building her own ventures. Said I'd refused to invest in her potential. But I had. Repeatedly. I'd backed her store launch, her course design, even paid to trademark her brand name, all of which, incidentally, she now claimed as independent wins. She wasn't just recasting the truth. She was rehearsing a version of the past that made her the brave one and me the burden. I didn't push back. Not yet. People like her count on silence as weakness. But I was simply letting the rope unspool. It escalated faster than I expected. 3 days after I traced the Hale payments, she tried to lock me out of our systems. Not metaphorically, literally. Passwords were changed across the board, business platforms, financial dashboards, even the cloud drive that held our joint strategy archives. I received auto-emails one after another. Password reset successful. Access removed due to administrative update. She didn't say a word directly. Just flipped the switches and waited, I assume, for me to protest. I didn't. Because what she hadn't accounted for was ownership. The accounts she tried to claim weren't built on joint access. They were built under my name, my IAN, and backed by capital from my trust. I'd let her operate with admin access because I believed in shared growth. She believed that meant shared control. It didn't. While she was scrambling to overwrite login credentials, I was already deep in the back end restoring full permissions. Quietly. No announcements. No retaliation. Just digital precision. I also flagged our CPA. No details, just a preliminary alert. Need a full pull on all business expenditures and ledger access. Legal classification pending. That same night, she sent a message as if nothing had happened. Hope the week's been grounding for you. Energy's been heavy. No mention of the lockouts. No mention of the calculated removal. She was still playing both games, martyr in public, architect in private. So I started building a firewall of my own. I opened a new business account, removed her name from every future disbursement, and paused all auto payouts from the shared LLC. Every transaction now required manual review. I changed the filing address to my short-term rental, updated my estate counsel, created duplicate storage for every tax return and grant document. She wouldn't notice right away. These weren't systems she monitored closely. That was the point. I'd also pulled the metadata from our shared invoices. The consulting firm she'd created for those hail payments had been incorporated only 6 weeks ago. No website. No team. Just a P.O. box and a Stripe account. A shell. Her attempt to spin me out of our shared business had made one critical mistake. She tried to cut me out of something I built, but she forgot that I never needed her permission to take it back. Every move she made was another data point. And I was recording all of it. I never touched her phone. Never opened her laptop. Never even hovered near her side of the home office when we were still playing house. But I know how systems talk. I know how metadata lingers, how paper trails whisper louder than words. While she posted sunrise mantras and new chapter quotes to a curated digital following, I logged into our transaction archives and began digging through the quiet corners, the vendor IDs, the routing numbers, the refund timestamps. That consulting firm? It wasn't just a shell. It was hers. Registered under a proxy name, sure, but I traced the sign-up email to a domain she owned, one I'd helped her buy last year when she talked about starting a podcast on transformational business sovereignty. The project never launched. But the digital footprint remained. The so-called strategist she was paying, Hale, had used the same invoice template she'd once used for her private design clients. Same font. Same layout. Same phrasing. It wasn't carelessness. It was arrogance. She'd used our business account as a piggy bank for her personal evolution, retreats, voice work intensives, custom wardrobe consultations masked as presence coaching. I cross-checked every vendor name. Found 5 more aliases all pointing to the same bank account. Each invoice had a service title. Not one had a deliverable. No reports, no documentation, no outcomes, just vague language and round dollar amounts. Then I found the trigger. A single PDF invoice dated 3 months back, billed to us by Hale and Company. Strategy. Service rendered. Executive Realignment Advisory. $5,000. Beneath it, a memo I hadn't seen before. Includes overnight support for emotional reset. The phrase hit like a chord struck out of tune. Overnight support. There it was. I sat back in the office chair, hands still, heart slower than it should have been. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just the settling quiet of confirmation. She hadn't just spent our money. She'd funneled it through a lie and handed it to someone I once mentored, someone I'd once vouched for to a dozen investors. The breach of trust wasn't spontaneous. It was methodical. And so was I. I compiled every invoice, every transfer, every digital fingerprint. I logged IP addresses. By the following Monday, I'd made my move, not loudly, not through confrontation, but by removing the scaffolding she assumed would hold. First, I shut down her access to all shared platforms. Not just financial accounts, everything. Project management boards, CRM systems, the brand database, even our shared social scheduler. Her login attempts would fail silently. No error messages. Just denial. Then I ended vendor relationships she'd established using my credentials. I sent clear notices. All future agreements must be reviewed through legal. No further contact from unauthorized representatives. By the end of the day, I'd closed 3 business loops she'd been managing under the guise of strategic autonomy. She noticed fast. The first message came that night. Hey, the invoice board's glitching. Are we still synced? I didn't respond. The second message, 12 hours later, was longer. More carefully worded. Not sure what's going on with account access. Maybe we need to realign our operating systems? Again, I stayed silent. Her tone shifted over the next 3 days. Each message became longer, more polished, each one testing a different emotional entry point. One lean nostalgic. One lean spiritual. One tried logistical concern. None of them acknowledged the core truth. That I was no longer a passive fixture she could manage. And yet, she hadn't broken character, not publicly. Not yet. Her feeds were still curated and glowing. She posted affirmations about sacred endings, captioned shots from borrowed albums with quotes about outgrowing environments that stifle expansion. But behind the scenes, she was unraveling. She thought I would fight her out loud. She didn't expect I'd simply unplug the system she was feeding from. Meanwhile, I met quietly with my legal team. I brought every compiled document, every logged entry, and we began outlining breach filings. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about trust, deception, and misuse of corporate structure. I didn't need to humiliate her. I just needed to end the story she was writing without me in it. She had staged her exit. Now I was designing mine. It was never about revenge. It was about the audit. The real kind, not just spreadsheets and systems, but of intention, of loyalty, of what stood when the performance ended. I initiated a full internal audit with our financial team under a confidentiality clause. All transactions over the past year. All vendor agreements. All compensation disbursements tied to her growth strategy. The results spoke for themselves. Over $60,000 in disbursements redirected through falsified invoices, all tied back to alias vendors she controlled or coordinated with. No tax records. No deliverables. We prepared a formal notice documenting financial inconsistencies. Precise language, clean facts, no emotional weight. Just line items, timestamps, and the name Marcus Hale in the digital ink. Then I began shifting ownership of the real assets, not the public ones she clung to for narrative, but the silent structures she never understood. The domain portfolios, the licensing agreements, the content library she used to boost her profile. I'd built it all. She posted about alignment, while I coded the back end. And now I took it back. Silently. Legally. She didn't know yet. Not fully. But the tremors reached her through the network. One of our old mutuals, a marketing consultant we'd both worked with for years, sent me a quiet message. She's been asking around. Seems nervous. Just thought you should know. 2 days later, screenshots landed in my inbox. Not from me, not solicited. A friend forwarded them anonymously, a group chat she was part of. In it, my wife had shared a photo of a journal page mocking my financial anxiety spiral, and laughing about how easily she could get what she wanted. She called me a strategic dinosaur, said I. Wouldn't know intuition if it hit him with a capital gains report. She sent laughing emojis. I stared at the screen for a full minute. Not because it hurt. That phase had passed. But because she still thought this was a game of optics. Still didn't realize the board had already shifted. She hadn't just breached trust. She documented her disdain for the very foundation she stood on. I forwarded the screenshots to my counsel and sent a single sentence. Confirm admissibility. And I scheduled a formal meeting. Not with her. With what came next. She arrived 5 minutes late, dressed like she was stepping into a branding shoot. All soft linens and layered necklaces, posture loose, smile calculated. Her eyes scanned the conference room quickly, expecting a familiar scene, me at the head of the table, ready to negotiate, to listen, to fix. But I wasn't alone. My legal advisor sat across from her seat, documents already prepared. A quiet assistant clicked record on a digital notepad. No hostility, no performance. Just structure. She hesitated at the door, confused. Then masked it with a bright laugh that didn't reach her eyes. This feels formal, she said, setting her canvas tote down on the chair nearest the window. I nodded, motioning toward the seat across from mine. It is. She waited for a beat. No small talk. No attempt to charm. That smile of hers, the one that used to melt tension, started to tremble. I opened the folder in front of me and slid it across the table. She didn't touch it right away. That's a summary of unauthorized use of shared business resources, I said, voice even. Invoices, alias payments, false consulting charges. All from the last 6 months. Her expression shifted, a half-second stutter between offense and calculation. I don't know what you think you've found, she started, hands still hovering over the folder. But I've been building something. You've been extracting, I interrupted quietly. Under my name. Through my systems. She flinched, just slightly. The legal advisor spoke next, tone neutral but direct. We've prepared a mutual release agreement. Effective termination of your operational involvement. No forward equity. No retroactive claims. A clean break. Now she looked at the folder. Opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned fast at first, then stopped. The hail invoices. The shell companies. The screenshots from her group chat. The journal photo. Her mouth opened, closed, then pressed into a thin line. You went through my. I didn't need to. I cut in. You left your fingerprints everywhere. I just stopped ignoring them. She looked at me then, really looked. For the first time in weeks. Something in her expression collapsed, not entirely from guilt, more from disbelief. You cut me out, I said calmly, watching the words settle between us. I just finalized it. For the first time, she had no script. Just silence. And the reality that she was no longer holding the pen. The fallout didn't start with an explosion. It began with quiet exits. One by one, names started disappearing from her public orbit, people she'd counted on to echo her curated transformation, to validate her new phase. A collaborator removed shared content from their platform. Another canceled an upcoming workshop they were hosting together. No statements. No drama. Just absence. She noticed quickly, of course. That performative calm she wore so carefully began to fray. Her social media shifted from radiant detachment to vague, wounded indignation. You don't know the full story, she wrote under a now-deleted post. People love to judge what they don't understand. But no one was judging. They were just watching. And what they saw, beneath the affirmations and softly filtered portraits, was a story unraveling without anyone to argue it. I didn't speak. Not to friends. Not to colleagues. I didn't need to. Because the documentation spoke louder than opinion. Those who mattered saw the evidence. Those who didn't faded out, just as she had when I first told her we needed to recalibrate. She tried to brand my caution as fear. My precision as control. Now she was learning that truth doesn't always need a microphone. One evening, I received a message from someone who'd once defended her, back when the narrative still held. I'm sorry. I didn't know the half of it. I didn't reply. That same night, her final text came through. I didn't think you'd go this far. It wasn't angry. It was soft. Almost disoriented. As if she still believed the version of me she had written for others, the quiet, agreeable constant. But that man was gone. Not replaced. Just fully revealed. I watched the message fade from my lock screen. I didn't open it. She'd once told me silence was a form of aggression. She was wrong. Silence was clarity. And I had nothing left to explain. The court date was set within weeks. She initiated proceedings, likely thinking she'd regain some narrative control by initiating the divorce herself. But filings don't erase timelines. And documents don't forget. Our attorneys exchanged disclosures. Hers arrived late, poorly organized, padded with emotional language. Mine came with a binder of exhibits, each one labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced with bank statements and IP logs. The judge didn't ask for commentary. They asked for verification. When her attorney attempted to frame the asset transfers as unilateral and aggressively preemptive, my team handed over the transaction history, each one lawful, each one provoked by misuse of company funds. She tried to reframe again, said it was a period of personal expansion, that I had limited emotional vocabulary, that I didn't support her growth. But growth wasn't the issue. It was unauthorized appropriation of shared assets. Her voice faltered when the judge asked directly, "Did you or did you not authorize payments to vendors that you failed to disclose were either fictitious or personally affiliated?" No metaphors then. No mantras. Just, I didn't realize it would be seen that way." She walked out of the courtroom pale, silent, jaw clenched. The documents were public record now. There was no pivot left to spin. The home, the one she once had me locked out of, was no longer hers to occupy. The deed had been reassigned through lawful reinvestment. I didn't keep it. I sold it quietly and used the proceeds to purchase a modest place, something leaner, smarter, entirely mine. I didn't throw a party. I didn't make a statement. I signed the last document, set the pen down, and let the silence wrap around me like something earned. The people who once nodded along to her curated updates had either distanced themselves or stayed silent. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Of truth. Of balance. Of how quickly a lie corrodes its own foundation when it isn't fed. She still posts, occasionally. Now the captions are longer. The smiles more strained. There's a tone of apology wrapped in defiance. But the reach is smaller. That's what happens when people stop listening. Not because of what was said, but because of what was revealed. The final message came 2 weeks after the court order. It was short. No emojis this time. No spiritual phrasing. Just raw regret, thinly covered in civility. "We could have handled this better." I stared at it for a moment. Not out of anger. Just recognition. It was the closest she'd ever come to honesty. But it was also too late. I didn't reply. Just archived it.